There is something that I think sits at the very center of this hobby, but oddly enough, it isn't something that we talk about very often. So we talk about watches, we talk about movements, complications, we talk about all the usual things: finishing, value retention, new releases, brands, and of course, grail watches, because we got to talk about those. But we rarely stop and ask a much more important question. And here's the question: are we actually collecting watches, or are we simply accumulating them? Now, before anybody gets defensive, this is not at all a criticism of large collections. I have seen collections with 50 watches that were incredibly thoughtful and intentional. So that's not what this is. And I've also seen collections with 3 watches that felt completely random and disconnected. I've also seen collections with 3 watches that told a beautiful story, and collections with 30 watches that looked more like a shopping history than a collection. So this is not really about quantity, but it's more about purpose. It's more about motivation. And ultimately, as is the premise of this entire channel, it's about satisfaction. Because if you'd follow this channel for any length of time, you know that I'm far less interested in helping people acquire more watches than I am in just helping people enjoy the watches that they already own. I say every episode, I want you to know and love your watches. So today, I want to explore the difference between collecting and accumulating. And we're going to talk a bit about the psychology that drives both behaviors and how we can build collections that genuinely enrich our lives instead of constantly leaving us feeling like something is missing. Now, my name is James. I'm a watch collector, I'm a watch enthusiast, and I'm an advisor, and I want you to know and love your watches. So if you like this type of content, please do like the video, subscribe to my channel. You'll see new content coming every week, and check the description below for more that you can enjoy. Now, as we get started, we've got to do our weekly wrist check, and this week I am wearing my Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Enamel 2019 release, blue enamel dial with multiple styles of guilloche on the dial. Just incredible, white gold, and 2 to 3 days to make one single dial. It's amazing. I love it. So we're going to start with a simple question today. What exactly is a collection? How would you define that? Well, most people would probably answer by pointing to a group of some sort of objects, right? A collection is a bunch of watches, or it's a bunch of cars, or it's a bunch of books. But I don't think that that is quite what it is. Because if I walk into a room and I see 20 random watches just thrown askew into a drawer, I don't necessarily see a collection. I see ownership. And those aren't exactly the same thing. I think a true collection has structure. There's intent. There's probably a story there. Like each individual piece relates to the others in some meaningful way. Now, sometimes that relationship is really obvious. Maybe someone collects military watches, or they love German watchmaking, or they're super into perpetual calendars. Maybe it's like vintage Omega, I don't know. In those situations, the theme is pretty easy to identify. But collections don't need an obvious category for them to be meaningful. I think some of the best collections that I've ever seen were deeply personal. We've talked about this a little bit. Maybe it was a watch purchased after a promotion, a watch that was acquired when a child was born, something inherited from a family member, a grandfather, a dad, or a watch that just commemorates a significant achievement in life. And I think we have a lot of those. Now, in those cases, the collection isn't organized around any technical specification. It's just more organized around a life experience of some kind. The watches kind of turn into chapters in a story, if you will. And to me, that's what separates collecting from simply owning a bunch of stuff. Like a collection creates meaning, it gives context and purpose. And when I look at a truly great collection, I don't just see the watches that are there, but I see the person that's behind the watches. Now let's contrast that with accumulation. I think accumulation is actually a lot easier to define because accumulation is just ownership with no direction. It's just the act of continuously adding things without having a clear understanding of why you're adding them. Now, let me be careful here because I want to get in front of some possible misconceptions. Accumulation does not equate to irresponsibility. It also doesn't equate to making bad decisions. And I think kind of tied to that, it doesn't mean that you're financially reckless either. It just means the acquisition itself has become the primary objective. The next watch becomes more important than the collection as a whole. The chase becomes more important than ownership. So there could be a variety of reasons. You're buying a watch because it's a good deal, it's trendy, a certain YouTuber recommended, or you buy a watch because everyone on the forums is talking about it, or you just feel like something is missing. And over time, slowly but surely, the collection grows. And oddly enough, your level of satisfaction does not continue to grow with it. In fact, sometimes the opposite actually happens. So the larger your collection becomes, the more difficult it becomes to appreciate any individual watch in the collection. Collection kind of starts to resemble like, I don't know, a storage system rather than a source of joy for you. And I do think that many collectors eventually find themselves confronting this reality. Again, it's not because they've done something wrong. It's just because they've never stopped to ask why they're buying these watches in the first place. And I'll tell you, I've been doing this a lot recently because I think that in the 6+ years that I've been collecting watches in earnest, my motivations have changed. And I think that matters. So there are some changes coming to the collection. So why do human beings actually collect things? I think to understand how this happens, we've got to dive again into a little bit of human psychology because let's be real. I mean, collecting is not unique to watches. People collect all sorts of things from art to books. I talked about that before. Stamps, coins, that's a thing. People collect wine. You can drink it. People collect it. They collect cars. Collecting has appeared throughout all of human history. And I do think the reason why is because collecting satisfies some very deep psychological needs. The first one is definitely identity. Human beings naturally build narratives about who they are. We all do it, and this can be good and bad. I mean, some people identify as musicians or athletes or craftsmen or historians. Collections kind of become physical expressions of those identities. And I think for us, watches represent a lot more than just timekeeping. Again, you could tell time on your phone, but they represent engineering, they represent craftsmanship, there's history involved, some sort of design elements or tradition, and the ingenuity of the mechanical engineering behind it. So when we buy a watch, we're often buying what that watch symbolizes. We're buying what it says about our interests and values. Parenthetically, I hate the videos that are like, well, this watch equates to this car, and this watch equates to this car brand. I think those stereotypes are absolutely dumb, and I don't like them. Anyways, but again, it's the watches represent our interests and values in a way. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. In fact, it's part of what makes collecting meaningful. But again, identity is only part of that story. I do think another major driver in this is order. It's kind of a weird concept. But human beings love structure. We do like to add structure. Some people that's to the extreme. I think I fall into that category. And there's other people that it's a little bit less, but they just like it generally in their lives. So, we like to categorize things. We like organizing things, making systems. This is why catalogs can be really satisfying It's why, especially for me, spreadsheets are super satisfying. Even tracking collections. I mean, like there are so many apps or ways to track literally what you wear every day. So it's like we enjoy creating order out of this complexity that exists. And in a way, a collection provides a framework for that. Kind of gives us this sense of progress, coherence maybe. But the most important reason we collect is there's meaning. There's meaning behind collecting. Objects kind of become almost containers for memories. So the value isn't always in just the object itself. The value is in what the object represents to you. So again, a watch can remind you of a period of your life, a personal achievement, a relationship, a milestone of some kind. And I do think that when watches carry those meanings, they become far more difficult to replace. And now we arrive at the danger of collecting, because the same psychology that makes collecting rewarding can also make it addictive. Very often there's this duality to some of these ideas. There is a fascinating reality about human behavior in this sense, and that is that the anticipation of acquiring something is often more emotionally powerful than actually owning it. You've probably experienced this in other aspects of your life. Think about a watch that you've wanted for years. Think about the research phase. I've talked a little bit about this before prior, but you're reading reviews, right? You're watching videos. You're comparing specifications between watches. You're scrolling through Instagram to find pictures. Maybe you're in watch groups where you can see it. You're kind of imagining it on your wrist. And those weeks, or sometimes months or years in my case, can be incredibly exciting. And then eventually the watch arrives. You open the box, you put it on the wrist. You're just, oh, it feels amazing. For a while. And then something happens. We've talked about this concept, hedonic adaptation, where you adapt to your positive experiences very quickly. The thing that once felt incredible gradually becomes normal again. The Rolex, what was the big Rolex, just becomes your Rolex. Your Grand Seiko, that was so amazing and wonderful, it just becomes your Grand Seiko. And your JLC, your Jaeger LeCoultre, just becomes your JLC. That's it. And once that adaptation occurs, the brain naturally begins to start looking for another source of excitement. There's got to be another goal, another target, another acquisition, and suddenly you're back on that same treadmill of researching, comparing, shopping, planning, dreaming. And then the cycle starts all over again. And I think most collectors have experienced this, if not in watches, for sure in other areas of your life. But at some point, we truly convince ourselves that satisfaction is just one watch away. Like if I could just get that rose gold Daytona with chocolate dial, Arabic numerals, oh my gosh, it would just be next level. If I could just get the Longa. I remember trying on a little Longa, 36 millimeters, a Venturine dial, gorgeous. It was sunny out, so I took it out in the sun, looked at it in the sunlight, just on fire on the dial. So cool. If I could just get that perpetual calendar, maybe a Patek, 5230, let's say. Or that one independent brand. I still love some independent brands. Gronfeld. Again, Bart, Tim, if you're watching, if you're out there, send me one, I'll wear it, I promise. Then everything would feel complete. But the problem is that satisfaction is not produced by acquisition. It's produced by perspective. And if satisfaction came from ownership alone, there would be a specific number of watches that finally solve the problem. You would say, I finally have 3, I'm good. Or I've got my 6, I've got 7. I have one for every day of the week. I'm good. But the reality is, we all know collectors with 10 watches who aspire to have 20. And we know people with 20 that want to have 50. And 50 who want 100. It on and on and on. The finish line just keeps moving because, again, the problem was never the collection. The problem was the expectation. Because we mistakenly believe that ownership will create fulfillment, when in reality, ownership just amplifies whatever mindset we already have. It just amplifies it. It's kind of like having more money. Money doesn't change you, it just kind of allows you to be more of who you already are. So let's talk about some warning signs here. The first one is simple. I think the first warning sign that you are becoming an accumulator is that you spend more time shopping than you do wearing your watches. Think honestly about your own habits. How much time do you spend on dealer websites? Every day? Once a week? 6 times a day? Just think about that. How much time do you spend actually watching watch reviews? I mean, there are so many reviews. I have some on my channel. There are endless amounts of watch reviews that you can find out there because people just want to share, right? I mean, they want to describe their watches. They want to show what they have. They're excited to have them. How much time do you actually spend watching those? It's a good question. And then another kind of related point would be, how much time do you spend looking at watches that you don't own? I don't know. Versus, now compare that to the amount of time you spend looking at and appreciating the watches that you already do own. The watches that are sitting in your watch box or on your winder or whatever, wherever they are. I think that ratio tells you a lot. So that's a really important one, is how much time do you spend shopping? You spend more time shopping than wearing. Now, another sign is when every purchase becomes the last one. We've all said, oh, this is the last one, right? Every watch, suddenly it's the grail. Every watch is going to complete the collection. It's the final piece. And yet 6 months later, we're saying exactly the same thing again. Have you been caught in this trap? I think I've been caught in this trap. Another warning sign could be anxiety. This is kind of a weird one. We don't often associate anxiety with watch collecting, but I think this is relevant here. This hobby should do one thing. One thing. It should enrich your life. That's it. It should enrich your life. That is what a healthy hobby should do for you. Yeah, it might cost you money. You're not doing it as a business. It's just something to do for fun, in your spare time, maybe with friends, whatever. It should enrich your life in a whole host of ways. Here's what it should not do for you, is it should not create stress. If you are constantly worried about what you're missing, or what somebody else owns, or whether your collection measures up to some arbitrary standard that you've made up, something has shifted. Something has shifted. And I think that your collection at that point is no longer serving you. You are serving your collection. And that can be a dangerous place. If you have anxiety over watch collecting, go get help. Don't watch. You shouldn't be watching my channel if you have anxiety around watch collecting, because you need help. I'm going to say it right now. Not here to be your psychologist or your therapist, but you need some help. It's a dangerous place to be. Now, this is where I think the philosophy of this channel does come into play. So even though I just said stop watching it, this is where I can help. This is my goal here. Is satisfied collectors still admire watches. We still enjoy new releases. I still am very close to just going to my local AD and saying, hey, if you get a Yachtmaster 2, give me a call. Not because I want to buy one. I'm not ready to buy one. I don't have interest. I don't think I would buy one ever. But I just want to see it. I want to play with it. I want to check it out. I want to, set the timer on it. Because the ring command that was on the old one, I thought was just the coolest thing ever. And now they just have the system where the 4 o'clock pusher on the Yachtmaster 2 sets the countdown timer. I just think that's really neat. I would love to play with one. So if I get one to play with, I would go play with it. I'm not going to buy it. We still dream. Satisfied collectors still dream about stuff. I always mention Grunefeld. I just think they have some of the most beautifully finished watches. I'm at a point with my collection, again, where there's some change coming. I don't think it's going to fit into my collection at any point. I just don't think it's going to. But I still dream about it. And the difference is that satisfied collectors are able to separate admiration from ownership. I can admire a watch without needing to own it. This is definitely one of the most important lessons that I have personally learned through my collecting journey is you do not need to own everything that you appreciate. You can admire a watch, respect a watch. You can even love a watch. I mean, I think of some of the new stuff from Ulysse Nardin that is just unbelievable. Like the new Freak is insane. Even some of their older stuff, like some of their Marine Tourbillon models, are really, really cool. I love the Blue Dial Marine Tourbillon. I think it's one of the coolest looking watches ever. But I'm not going to buy it. Not going to buy it. For a lot of reasons. Wrist size, cost, all the things, just where it fits into my collection. I'm not going to buy it. But I do really like it a lot. Now, this might sound super obvious. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe you're sitting there saying, like, yeah, no kidding, James. Duh. But it's surprisingly difficult in a hobby that is built around acquisition. It just is. And I do think that once you learn that appreciation and possession are two distinct things, this hobby can become much more enjoyable for you. Because suddenly, every beautiful watch to you is not some sort of a planning for a future expense. Everything you go and see in a case at an authorized dealer doesn't flip the switch of financial planning. It's just something interesting to appreciate, and that's it. That's all it has to be. You don't have to make it into anything more than that. So, I am very positive. I am an optimist. So let's talk about how we avoid becoming accumulators. And the first thing that you need to do is you've got to define your philosophy. I'm not talking about your philosophy for life. That is a very broad topic, which I'm very interested in, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about defining some of the important questions when it comes to watch collecting, your watch collecting philosophy. The first thing to ask yourself is, why am I collecting? Why am I collecting? Am I collecting because I'm turning 30 this year? I'm not. This is almost 6 years ago now for me. I'm turning 30 this year. I have done so much to work my butt off, to achieve in my career, to be better with my health, to be a better human, to focus on relationships, to work on my leadership skills, all of those things. And for me, this watch is a symbol of all that work. That was why I started collecting. In earnest, in luxury, because I had had watches long before that. But that was why I started collecting, because I wanted a symbol, a representation, like I talked about, of a period of time in my life, and an achievement, and a milestone, kind of all of the above. That's why I started collecting luxury watches. So that's the first question. Now the second question, what interests me the most? What interests me the most? And this is a very vague question. You could get really, really specific with this question. So when you say what interests me the most, you could break it down to brand. What brands interest me the most? Why? Why? Is it the history and the heritage? Is it the design language that they use? Is it maybe some of the complications that they have to offer? Maybe it's the materials. Maybe it's where they get the inspiration for their dials. Maybe it's the brand that you have some sort of an association with from a relationship in your life. Again, a grandfather that gifted you something, or just even with sports, right? There's all the association with Omega and the Olympics. If you grew up athletic, there could be association there. So just what interests me the most and why? Why is that interesting to me? Ask these questions. Understand your own collecting motivations. It's really important. Third question, what story am I trying to tell? Now, I think this is another one you can interpret a couple of different ways. And there's a healthy way and there's a not healthy way to interpret this. The healthy way would be, what story am I trying to tell in the sense of what my collection shares? Like, what story does my collection share about me? And I think there's a very fine line between asking that question and saying, what am I trying to share about myself to other people? I think there's a little bit of a danger zone here where you could get, it's a slippery slope into the second way of asking that question. Because in that way, a lot of this comes down to, what am I trying to project to other people? Whether that is status, financial success, prestige, engineering, prowess, I don't know. But I do think there's a little bit of a distinction there, and you've got to keep those two separate from what's going to be the story around my collection to what story am I trying to sell to others, which ultimately I think means what story am I trying to sell to myself that I want other people to believe that I may not actually believe about myself. So we're getting a little into the nitty-gritty here of psychological aspects of self-esteem. Because that's a reality. That's a reality of what we do. Some of these things are expensive. And if any part of what you are projecting is prestige, it's empty. I'm just telling you, it's very empty. So what story am I trying to tell? Lastly, what do I value? This is kind of related to the interest question a little bit, but what do I value? It could be, again, materials, brands, finishing, design language, certain incorporations of stone dials, or various things like that, right? Just what do I value? And I mean, you can make this even broader, right? And pull it back, and what are the less tangible things that I value? Not so much with watches, but work ethic or intelligence or kindness, or just what are the different things that you value? That's a little bit outside of the scope of this conversation, but if you've not asked those questions, also very relevant. And again, the answers don't have to match anyone else's. They should not. This is not something that you look at your neighbor's paper here and find out what they've answered to these questions. Now, you may have conversations like that with a good friend or a spouse or a significant other, something like that. Those are the types of discussions that you should have with those people. But you should have answers, ultimately. You should have answers. So, again, how do we avoid becoming accumulators? First, define your philosophy. Ask yourself those questions. Why am I collecting? What interests me most? What story am I trying to tell? Not what story do I want to tell other people about me? What do I value? Those are some of the questions. Next, add some friction. Add some friction in there. The easiest purchases are often the worst purchases. I think I shared the story about my Crador that I once owned. And again, no, it's not the H2 or anything crazy. It was a quartz Crador. I loved Grand Seiko. I loved a lot of what Japanese watchmaking was about. The precision, the nature-inspired dials, the polishing, just the story behind it. I loved so much about that. And I had gotten rid of my Grand Seiko when I got my JLC, and I knew that I wanted a Grand Seiko back in the collection. And I thought to myself, you know what? I've seen some Crador stuff. It's really cool. I like it. And let me see what Crador has to offer that's within my price range. I found a $1,200 Crador, and I bought it, probably in the same night that I found it. And it's not that I didn't like the watch. I loved the watch. It was very cool, but it was not what I really wanted in a Grand Seiko. So introduce some friction. If you have the ability to add a waiting period in there, that might help. Obviously, depending on the financial level that we're talking about, that could force you to have a waiting period, so that could be important. But find some way to add friction into this. Give yourself some, either written or unwritten, it could be written down, give yourself some rules, some heuristical guidance here. Have a one in, one out policy. You know, I have 5 pieces in my collection, and I'm making a deal with myself that unless I get rid of one, I'm not adding anything else. Now, that may be valid for you, or that may not, depending on what your goals are, what your financial situation and budget are. There's a lot of factors, but having something like that can help. Spending time with a watch before purchasing it can help. Maybe you have a friend that has a similar or the same watch, or maybe you're part of a local group in your city where you can meet other enthusiasts and see a certain watch before you purchase it. Maybe it's just something you can go and see at a boutique or at an authorized dealer. So see if you can spend some time with the watch before you buy it. I do think that'll help either get a sense that it's more right for you, or get a sense that maybe it's not. So getting time with it can help. Anything that slows your decision-making process can reveal whether the desire is genuine or just kind of temporary and kind of fleeting a little bit. And then finally, do a periodic audit for your collection. I love doing this. I always joke with my fiance about going into the closet and just looking at everything that's in there and just saying, what do I want to get rid of? Why the heck do I have this? I haven't worn this in 6 months. What do I not need? Like, I think that's a super healthy thing. I do it with just about everything in my life. I'm telling you, I've done it recently with my collection, and it's one of the reasons why there is some movement that's going to be happening with my collection. So for every watch that you own, ask yourself, why do I own this? What was I thinking when I bought it? What was the whole goal of owning it? Did I accomplish it now that I own it? Do I still need to own it? Are there memories tied to this watch that would make me never want to sell it? Or have I checked that box and I don't really find the joy in wearing it anymore? So why do I own this? Would I buy it again today? Circumstances being all the same, knowing what I know now, having experienced what I have experienced. Would I buy it again? Like I say, I recently have done this and found the answer to be, intellectually, yes, I would buy it today. But from a different perspective, financially, I'm in a different place. I have different priorities than I did 6 years ago. That's okay. We change, we mature, we develop as collectors. So ask those questions. And then what unique role does it play? I've talked about before about having pieces that overlap and making sure that they fit into your lifestyle. So make sure that your watches have a unique role. What unique role does it play? Again, if you can't answer those questions, it might be time to reevaluate. Might be time to consolidate, or just straight up sell, or trade, or bring something new. Just some different thoughts. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought here, just to kind of bring it all home. And that is that the goal of this hobby is not to own the most watches. Again, I know collectors, and I see collectors that have literally a watch for every day of the year. And not cheap watches. They're like really some banger watches that they could wear a different one every day of the year. There's people out there like that. And then I know people who have one or two and they love them and they wear them all the time. So you've got to figure out where you fall on that spectrum. The goal is not to own the most watches. It's not even to own the best watches. And you have to define what that means for you. The goal of this hobby is to build a collection that genuinely adds value to your life. That's it. Enriches your life. A collection that reflects who you are, that creates memories, that inspires appreciation in you, and that brings you satisfaction. Because at the end of the day, watches are objects. Now, they're beautiful objects. They're fascinating objects in a mechanical sense, of course, and remarkable examples of both engineering and of craftsmanship. But the reality is, they're still objects. And if we are not careful, we can spend years and years and years chasing fulfillment through ownership, only to discover that, you know what? That fulfillment that you were seeking was never hiding in that next watch. It was not. It was hiding in our relationship with the watches that we already own. So, thank you for stopping by the video. I appreciate you being here. If you like this topic, take a look at one of my prior episodes where we talk about watch burnout and how to avoid it. It's related to this, but not the same. And leave a comment down below. Do you think you're currently collecting watches or accumulating watches? And what made you realize the difference? I would love to know. So leave me a comment down below. Take care, and I will see you in the next episode. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.